Welcome back. Let's start our top story coming out of the U.S., where President Donald Trump has said the Afghan Taliban have agreed on no violence in the region during a phone call. The telephonic conversation came 3 days after the U.S. and Taliban signed a peace agreement in Doha. The Taliban spokesperson said the group's chief negotiator, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, and Trump spoke for 35 minutes. Zabiullah said Baradar called on Trump not to allow anyone to violate the terms of the agreement. He said Trump told Baradar he will soon have U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speak to Ghani to remove hurdles in intra-Afghan talks. Trump told reporters he had a very good conversation with Mullah Baradar.
We don't want violence. We'll see what happens. They're dealing with Afghanistan, but we'll see what happens.
Okay? Do you believe this is a pandemic, sir? Is this
We had actually a very good talk with the leader of the Taliban. Yeah.
Well, Afghanistan's presidential palace says Qatar has offered its assistance to facilitate intra-Afghan talks. In a statement, the palace said Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani called Afghan President Ashraf Ghani to discuss the Doha deal. It said during the phone call, the two leaders discussed the implementation of the U.S.-Taliban agreement and intra-Afghan talks. The palace said Al Thani said both Kabul and the Taliban have to sort out their differences to form an inclusive government. It said Ghani thanked Sheikh Tamim and asserted he is open to further discussions about peace. Well, the OIC's special envoy for Kashmir, Yusuf Emel Dubai, has said the Kashmir issue is an internationally recognized dispute. In a meeting with Prime Minister Imran Khan in Islamabad, he said the OIC condemns India's move to revoke Kashmir's autonomy. Dubai said the resolution of the Kashmir issue is the OIC's top priority. Prime Minister Khan said India has turned Kashmir into an open prison by imposing a curfew on 8 million people. He said the international community must help stop Indian atrocities against minorities. He lauded the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for extending unwavering support to the people of Kashmir. Earlier, Dubai met with Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and said he would visit the line of control on Wednesday. In the Indian capital, New Delhi, Muslim minorities are living in relief camps, after Hindu mobs attacked and burnt their houses last month. 47 people, mostly Muslims, were killed in that violence, which began during protests against the controversial Citizenship Act. Hundreds of Muslims have lined outside Eidgah in Delhi, which has been turned into a shelter by the Muslim Waqf Board. Organizers said more than 1,000 people have been accommodated over the last 24 hours. Speaking to media, women shared stories of harassment, torture, and property damage at the hands of mobs. They said rioters threw petrol bombs at their homes and assaulted them as they were trying to escape. Well, the Muslim community is still trying to recover after 3 days of violent programs that killed over 40 people last week in India. A Muslim couple has spent nearly a week outside a local morgue waiting to identify the body of the woman's father. More in this report.
Gulshan Nasiruddin's father disappeared last week when mobs of Hindu fanatics launched an assault on Muslims and their neighborhoods. All she's found of him is a single leg that she's been waiting for doctors to identify for a week. The only person she's had with her is her nearly blind husband.
My father's whole body was burnt and only one leg was recovered. So right now, the doctors are saying, how do we believe that it was your father? You can't recognize anything through just one leg. That's why, the day before yesterday, they took a sample for the DNA test, and only after the test, they will be able to establish something definitive.
The impoverished family has now lost its only breadwinner as a result of unfettered Hindu extremism. Such stories have sent a shockwave of fear throughout India, where Muslims say they no longer feel safe.
Whatever happened was wrong, and it should not have happened. Those people should get reformed, and there should be peace all around. It should not be like this, where we are all living a life of fear.
Many Muslim families have left their homes, leaving for cities with less religious tensions. Meanwhile, schools and businesses remain shut in New Delhi.
Due to the shutting down of shops, the businesses are closed. People have suffered losses. The children are not going to schools. And there are problems at people's homes, like milk or bread. So many people have problems.
this is not an isolated incident. Signs of rising Hindu-Muslim tensions have been growing since Prime Minister Narendra Modi took office in 2014. These include cow lynchings and hate-laden speeches by members of the ruling BJP and the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act. As such, India's so-called secular image now lies in tatters, along with the lives of thousands of its Muslim citizens.
Well, the United Nations has appealed for nearly $900 million to help thousands of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. The UN Refugee Agency and International Organization for Migration have launched a joint appeal for the cause. The UN said the money would address the needs of approximately 855,000 Rohingya refugees. The international body said the funds would also help over 444,000 vulnerable Bangladeshis in the communities hosting Rohingya refugees. It said the funds would cover food, shelter, sanitation, healthcare, education, and protection services. Over 740,000 Rohingya Muslims fled to neighboring Bangladesh after Myanmar military launched a massacre in 2017. Russia says Turkey has failed to meet its obligations under a pact to create a safe zone in Syria's Idlib province. The Defense Ministry says terrorist fortifications have merged with Turkish outposts, resulting in daily attacks on Russia's Hmeimim airbase in Syria. The ministry said Ankara violated international law by increasing troop numbers in Idlib equal to a mechanized division. Russia's accusation comes ahead of Thursday's meeting between Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. Turkey, meanwhile, says one of its soldiers was killed while 9 others were wounded by Syrian forces in Idlib province. With the latest death, 57 Turkish soldiers have been killed in the conflict in the region. The U.S. says it is willing to give NATO ally Turkey ammunition and humanitarian assistance in Syria. Speaking in Turkey, the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria engagement, James Jeffrey, said Washington is ensuring U.S.-made equipment is ready for Turkish troops. Stressing Turkey's special status as a NATO ally, Jeffrey said Washington will provide humanitarian aid and share intelligence. The U.S. has already pledged $108 million in aid to the people in Syria. Jeffrey said the U.S. is waiting to see Turkey's diplomatic position with regards to Russia when President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visits Moscow. Pakistan says it fully supports Turkey's efforts in its fight against terrorism. In a telephone call to President Tayyip Erdogan, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan condoled the death of Turkish soldiers in Syria. Khan said people in Pakistan are standing in solidarity with the brotherly Turkish nation in this time of grief and sorrow. He reaffirmed support for Ankara's security concerns in the region and also lauded Turkey for hosting millions of Syrian refugees. Prime Minister Khan called upon the international community to help Turkey bear the enormous burden of refugees. Khan also offered to extend all possible support and assistance from Pakistan in this regard. The Prime Minister thanked President Erdogan for his unequivocal support on the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Russia has rejected Turkey's claims about refugee flows and the humanitarian crisis in Idlib. In a statement, the Russian Defense Ministry described the information as groundless. More on that now in this report.
Nearly 1 million people have been displaced since December near Turkey's southern border due to the violence in Syria's Idlib. The United Nations says it could become the worst humanitarian crisis in the country's 9-year-long civil war. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had also criticized the EU for not sharing the migrant burden with Turkey. He warned millions of migrants will soon head for Europe. But Moscow downplayed the situation, saying no more than 35,000 people have crossed the border in 2020 so far. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Russia will not stop fighting terrorism in Syria's Idlib region in order to solve Europe's migration crisis. Meanwhile, Greece blocked new asylum applications after Turkey opened its borders for migrants to travel to the EU.
Well, Amnesty International says Greece has been violating EU and international laws and putting human lives at risk by its measures to block the entry of migrants. In a statement, the rights group said people seeking asylum are once again being used as bargaining chips in a callous political game. Amnesty said Athens must refrain from using excessive force, and those seeking asylum in Greece should not be treated as criminals. Meanwhile, the EU Commission has said Greece is Europe's shield against illegal migrants. The Commission has pledged $780 million in financial aid for controlling migrants. Over 130,000 migrants have crossed to Europe after Turkey opened its borders, while accusing the EU of not fulfilling the promises it made. Elsewhere in the United States, voters have gone to the polls in 14 U.S. states on Super Tuesday, the largest voting day in the Democratic presidential race. Former Vice President Joe Biden is projected to win 7 of 14 states, while early frontrunner Bernie Sanders has captured 3. More on that now in this report.
Super Tuesday is the most consequential day of voting in the Democratic presidential primary race. Ahead of the vote, Joe Biden picked up endorsements from ex-mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar, who have both dropped out. Biden is set to win in Minnesota, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. Exit polls suggest Biden has won large majorities of African American voters, a crucial bloc in the Democratic Party.
We're still waiting for Texas and California, a few other small states to come in. But it's looking good. So I'm here to report we are very much alive. And make no mistake about it, this campaign will send Donald Trump packing.
Despite Senator Sanders' loss to Biden in South Carolina, he still remained the frontrunner heading into Super Tuesday. Sanders is expected to win in Colorado, Utah, and his home state, Vermont.
We're doing well in Texas right now. We won Colorado. And I'm cautiously optimistic that later in the evening, we can win the largest state in this country, the state of California.
The next primary contests are scheduled for March 10th in Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, and Washington state. A candidate requires more than 2/3 of the delegates to secure the nomination at the party's convention in July.
Time now for a break. I'll be back after that with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The UN watchdog says Iran risks triggering a new crisis if it does not cooperate. The IAEA says Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium is 5 times greater than the limit fixed by the 2015 nuclear deal. In a report, the International Atomic Energy Agency criticized Iran for not providing access to 2 undeclared locations. The watchdog says Tehran has refused to answer questions about those locations, saying it would not recognize allegations on past activities. Tehran has been progressively reducing its commitments to the accord in retaliation to the U.S. withdrawal from the treaty. In Yemen, meanwhile, over 2,000 families have been forced from their homes after heavy fighting in the northern parts of the country. The development comes after Houthi rebels seized control of the provincial capital Al-Hazm. In a statement, the UN humanitarian agency said 1,800 families fled districts of Al-Ghail and Al-Hazm since the fall of the city. It said more than 2,000 families reached the city of Ma'rib on the 1st of March. Houthis control most of Al-Jouf, but its capital had been in the hands of the government. Yemen's internationally recognized government has been fighting Houthi rebels since 2014, following their seizure of the capital, Sana'a. Italy's Civil Protection Agency has reported the deaths of another 27 people over the last 24 hours from the new coronavirus. The country's death toll is now at 79, the highest in the world outside China, where 38 new deaths brought its total toll to nearly 3,000. More on that now in this report.
Up to now, 3,200 people from around the world have lost their lives because of the virus, which has further infected over 93,000 people in 70 countries. While the growth of the number of cases in the epicenter, China, has slowed, in Europe and the US, the number of infections has only grown. In Iran, another 11 people have died from the infection, taking their total to 77. South Korea has reported another 516 new coronavirus cases, bringing the country's total to over 5,000, with 32 deaths.
There are about 2,300 confirmed patients in Daegu who are awaiting hospital or treatment center admission. The government is deploying all possible resources across the government to increase the number of treatment centers for patients in Daegu who are waiting in their homes.
UK health officials have warned the new coronavirus has the potential to infect 80% of the British population. In the meantime, the number of deaths in the US has risen to 9, while the authorities have reported over 100 confirmed cases.
We've already made a decision on parts of Italy, and Japan is very unfortunate because I've seen the incredible job they did on the Olympics.
The World Bank has committed $12 billion in aid for developing countries grappling with the spread of the disease.
Well, the World Health Organization has warned that masks and goggles used by health workers fighting coronavirus are running out. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said supply disruptions are caused by rising demand and hoarding. Speaking in Geneva, the WHO chief said manufacturers have to increase supplies of protective equipment by 40% to meet current needs. He said COVID-19 cannot be stopped without protecting health workers. Tedros said the international health body had sent over 500,000 sets of personal protective equipment to 27 countries. He warned medical supplies are fast depleting and asked for a massive rise in production. More than 3,000 people have died from the virus, while over 92,000 have been infected across 77 countries. In other news, 25 people have been killed as a tornado struck the city of Nashville in the U.S. state of Tennessee. Police said 30 people were wounded. The fire department said about 48 collapsed structures had been reported. Police said several gas and power lines were also damaged. Officials say emergency responders are being treating the injured. Nashville's John C. Tune Airport also sustained significant damage as several hangars were destroyed. 23 people have also died in torrential rains that hit the Brazilian states of Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Officials said constant rain has triggered flash floods and has destroyed homes. Officials said another 32 people are missing in Sao Paulo, raising fears the toll can rise further. Rescue officials said the victims were electrocuted, buried in landslides, or drowned. They said violent storms in recent days have dumped a month's worth of rain on some areas. They said several highways have been blocked by landslides, including some linking Santos, the biggest port in South America, to Sao Paulo. Louis Vuitton wrapped up Paris Fashion Week with a mix-up of retro chic, sporty, and futuristic looks. The show was set to a Baroque soundtrack sung by a choir in costume. More on that now in this report.
Plunged into darkness, the audience inside the Louvre's Cour Carrée gasped as the curtain rose to reveal a terrace backdrop with 200 singers and actors. The costumes these characters wore ranged in style from the 15th century to the 1950s. As for the collection, that too was filled with clashing historical references befitting the name Collisions of Time.
Fashion show that measures up to Louis Vuitton creative director Nicolas Casquier, who is a very, very, very good designer. It's very beautiful. He's faithful to his silhouettes, to the girls' personalities. It has a kind of freedom. It is very much like who he is, and it's very good.
Designer Nicolas Casquier said he wanted different eras to be confronted with another one, our own. This involved biker jackets with Baroque detailing and futuristic dresses with metallic ruffles alongside more familiar fabrics. The models carried Louis Vuitton's signature monogram bags.
I liked a lot the accessories and the shapes of the clothing, and I think it was a perfect mix between androgyn but also feminine.
This catwalk season has been disrupted by the fast-spreading coronavirus outbreak, which kept Chinese buyers and socialites from European events. French labels Agnes B and APC had to cancel their presentation in Paris, while in Milan, Giorgio Armani held its show behind closed doors.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the Federal Reserve should cut interest rates even more. His remarks follow the central bank's announcement that it will trim rates by 0.5 percentage point. The Federal Reserve has cut the interest rates to combat the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak. In a tweet, President Trump said the Federal Reserve must come into line with other countries and competitors. He said they are not on a level field, which is unfair for the United States. Trump said now is the time for the Federal Reserve to lead. Following the announcement, U.S. stocks dropped in volatile trading as the decision came 2 weeks before its scheduled meeting. Asian markets are trading mixed following a tumble overnight on Wall Street. Investors are speculating over the capacity of central banks to inject stimulus measures to fight the economic impact of coronavirus. Seoul's Kospi is trading over 2% higher. The Nikkei 225 has gained marginally after Japan pledged to use its surplus reserve to fund supplementary budgets. Shanghai Composite and Hong Kong's Hang Seng have lost a fraction.
We're seeing the markets pull back from that big rally we had yesterday. That's entirely understandable given that the Fed rate cut we saw was already baked into markets yesterday with that big rally. So we're giving some back now. We expect volatility to continue just like this for the rest of the week and perhaps for a few weeks.
Let's now find out what the weather is like around the world. And there you have it. You're all caught up. For the latest updates, though, on these and other news stories, you can always follow us on our social media at Indus.News. Thanks for watching this bulletin.